Hello, National University Academy students with Biology B. We're wrapping up the year here. We have a couple more units to go, Unit 7 and 8. I know many of you have already reviewed the Unit 6 videos. I'm going to be going over animal behavior, operant conditioning, fixed action patterns, and stimulus response, Pavlov, and a few other things that we were covering in chapters 36 and 37 of your textbook. There are a few questions that will go outside of the boundaries of those two chapters, but when I discuss those, I'll give you the page numbers and where to find that information. Okay, so let's begin by discussing the learning that takes place as a result of rewards given to accidental behaviors is known as operant conditioning. Now, operant conditioning is discussed on page 827 of your textbook, and there's the example given of trial and error learning in a controlled environment as operant conditioning. Jane Goodall, this is mentioned mostly in the lecture, not so much in the textbook, was a pioneer in the study of primate behavior. For more on primate behavior, you can look on page 836 of your textbook, but please take note, as you're taking notes right now, that Jane Goodall was known for her work in the study of primate behavior. The ability to reason and solve problems requires a large cerebrum. This is mentioned on page 951 of your textbook. This is outside of the parameters of our original chapter discussion. The reason we talk about this is because we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, frontal cortex, and those logic centers here that allow you to intellectualize and do other things with the brain, including memory, perception, intellectual function. We'll go over the corpus callosum that unites the two hemispheres there. But remember, the ability to reason and solve problems requires a large cerebrum. Learned animal behaviors are influenced by experience. This is reviewed on page 827. And the definition of learning involves the development of behaviors through experience is called learning. So we know that the definition itself has the mention of experience right in there. Again, that's on page 827. For classical conditioning, an unrelated response is associated with a stimulus. Now, this is when Pavlov provides the meat powder or the meat for the dog and then rings the bell, and then eventually every time he does this he's ringing the bell. After a while the dog if you just ring the bell, will salivate. The initial stimulus is that meat powder. The response is the salivation. You do those in unison with one another, that is, offer the meat powder or put forth the meat powder for the dog to smell, and then the salivation occurs. Ring the bell as you're introducing the meat powder or the stimulus. If you keep doing this, eventually when you just ring the bell, the dog will salivate at the ring of the bell without the actual natural stimulus of the meat powder. So this is called classical conditioning. Trial and error learning is an example of operant conditioning, and I just went over that. That's all of this is on page 827, the last three questions. Something in the environment to which an animal can respond is called the stimulus. Again, meat powder, and the Pavlov introducing the meat powder as a stimulus. Learning that can occur only during a specific period early in life for an animal is called imprinting. This is on page 829, and they mentioned this Conrad Lorenz's work with ducks. If you want to read some great work by Conrad Lorenz, this is his book I happen to have from an old biology teacher who recommended it. King Solomon's Ring. We had to read that for his class. Good class. This was in junior college years ago. Again, that's called Imprinting, page 829 of your textbook. The hognose snake. You'll notice a picture of the hognose snake on page 831. The hognose snake that flips onto its back and pretends it is dead is displaying a defensive behavior. When we were out at the tide pools today, Ryan was touching the sea anemone, and he saw it fold in on itself, and he was wondering, oh, why is it doing that? Well, that's a quick defense mechanism. It's not, tortoise doesn't want to be eaten. So as soon as it's touched, it's going to fold in on itself. In this case, the defensive behavior of the snake is to play dead. The bullnose snake, that is. 50 days after hatching, the white-crowned sparrow will never be able to sing a normal song if reared in isolation. This is an example of a critical period for learning. This is in the first paragraph on page 835. The orb spider builds her web in exactly the same way every time. This is an example of fixed action patterns. This is on page 826 of your textbook. These behaviors are genetically predisposed. Fixed action patterns of the orb spider. The purpose of animal signals is to stimulate a response in another animal. This is on page 833. Sexual selection is an evolutionary mechanism, and this is that Darwin recognized, and this is on page 836 of your textbook, top of the page. A male lion that takes over a pride may kill all the young or cubs in order to ensure the survival or reproduction of himself, in other words, reproduction of his offspring. And this is called individual selection. This is on page 825 of your textbook. Look for the picture of the lion, unfortunately, with the cubs in its mouth. The nearest building behavior, the nest building behavior of bowerbirds, this is on page 826, is innate. When they bred the two different birds together, they noticed that some would tuck the nesting material in their back feathers while others kept it in their beaks. And when they crossed the species, they noticed that the birds were confused, didn't know what to do. Interesting. The innate animal behaviors are influenced by genes. Innate animal behaviors are influenced by genes. Again, these are genetically programmed into them. And the example they give of that, of course, is of the orb spider with those fixed action programmed responses or fixed action. Let's see, let me turn right to that page. This is 826. Those are fixed action pattern behaviors. Innate behaviors are influenced by genes. So that's really all you'll find on the quiz for Unit 7. So please go over these. Call or email with your questions or concerns. I would like you to excel and do well in this course. So if you have any questions, email, Skype, call me, and we'll go over the information together. Independent study can be difficult. If you advocate for yourself and ask questions and call and email, you are doing exactly what an independent study student should do, and that is inquire, be inquisitive, and use your teachers and the TAs as a resource. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you both for the rest of this year and hopefully next year. Thank you. Bye now.